Hello and welcome to a brand new If You Know Your History with me, Jonny Owen, and my dear friend...
Mark Webster, so I am your dear friend, Mr. Jonny Owen. And more importantly than us two being great pals,
Yes.
we need to speak to our pals further north from where we're sitting, don't we?
The good old Scots.
Thank you.
My fellow Celts from the north.
Yes.
Huge fans of the show, Mark. Lots and lots of stuff from the Scots, which is wonderful. So we thought we'd do a show today about the greatest achievements of probably Scottish football, which was Celtic, winning the European Cup, no doubt about it. First British team, first Northern European team, first non-Latin team to win the European Cup, something they're inordinately proud of, quite rightly. But also that year was a big year, 1967.
Well, I love the fact that the manager precurses it with the phrase, in quotes, "We could win everything."
We could win.
Now
they do.
They do. Which put that on your boys' shoulders. Why don't you? But
Yes,
they did.
they
Which
did.
is an amazing thing. But John, I think what's crucial with this is because this is very storied.
It is.
But it starts with you in this sense because, of course, Jock Stein, the manager of Celtic, is he the top of the pile of your documentary Three Kings that you made?
Oh, that's a great question.
Yeah, you see.
I did make a film called The Three Kings, all about the lives of Sir Matt Busby, Bill Shankly, and Jock Stein, John Stein, who were three Scottish miners when they left school as young boys, and then became three of possibly the most influential, certainly British managers ever, arguably in the world. And it's become very successful, very popular. And I think that's why it links into the fact that we're going to do this one, which is about the Celtic team. But also about, like I said, the high watertide of Scotland. Because obviously, Rangers are another great club in Glasgow. They got to a European Cup Winners' Cup final that year, Mark, and only lost by the odd goal to Bayern Munich. And even more famously, watch his face here, they beat the then world champions at Wembley. They're now called the Wembley Wizards, aren't they? Or the Wembley Wonders. They beat England 3-2. England's team, almost exactly the team that won the World Cup the year before. Scotland's team with Jimmy Baxter, Dennis Law, win 3-2. So in Scottish minds, 1967, they are the world champions, the European champions, and should have won the European Cup Winners' Cup.
So it's not simply the year after England won the World Cup, then it transpires. It's the year we got knocked down a peg or two.
We
do part of the challenge.
Mark, you're absolutely right on this. I do have to qualify this. It was huge when Scotland beat Wembley in 1967.
Yeah.
My father was a Welshman, said this. That was kind of seen as an unofficial World Cup. It was built up in the world press at that point.
Yes.
Because the Scots had famously just missed out on the 1966 World Cup. It was a really difficult way of qualifying in those days. England qualified then in those days because they were the hosts.
Sure.
So they got in there. So there was a feeling in Scotland that if they'd made that World Cup, they could have possibly challenged for it, certainly towards the quarter semi-final sort of area, because they had the great team of all the type of players just mentioned, Dennis Law, Baxter, McNeil.
And of course, them not being in a effectively British World Cup in the sense where it's the same lump of land.
Yeah.
It's something of a tragedy. You really wanted them to be there, didn't you?
I mean, they used to do this odd thing in those days, especially in the European groups, where the home nations was seen as the qualifying for tournaments.
Right.
So you had to win the home nations to qualify
Which, of course,
for the Euros.
basically then eliminates everybody else.
Absolutely. So Northern Ireland, with the great Georgie Best, a really fine Wales team with people like Mike England in it, and a really good Scottish team. So you've got 3-4 very strong teams trying to get into the European Championships. So it was tough. But England get there and Scotland beat them. But I think it's worth talking about Scottish football and its history and its role in football, because me and you often talk about this. They are seen as the inventors of the passing game. And we often mention the fact that so many football teams that started up in England, their early history tended to be dominated by a Scotsman or Scottish players.
That's the point. So 67, you probably literally go back 100 years to the point when the game is the Scottish game.
Yes.
So therefore, leaping forward to that 67 into the early 70s, it is kind of 100 years for their next golden era, isn't it? But that golden era clearly was a massive influence, because it was around then, I'm starting to guess, that we're seeing managers and players coming down from the north, crossing the border, and enhancing English football teams.
Yeah, well,
in particular.
Yeah, the cliche, Mark, isn't it, of certainly until I was in my 20s, would have been, for us growing up, that Scottish managers tend to be the greatest managers ever.
Yeah.
Then we had sort of the influx of the foreign manager, and we've probably washed up somewhere now where people really like, I don't know, Portuguese or Spanish managers. That's the sexy thing. And how you would think of the Portuguese and the Spanish now is the way that you should think that what everybody thought about the Scots.
Good point.
For a long time in the 20th century. They were seen as innovative. They played quick-flowing in football. We'll talk about this with Celtic. They played possession-based football. They talked about the short passing game. And there's stuff in the film where I speak about this, and the late great Paddy Barclay talks about it, a fine Dundee man himself.
Yeah.
He was kind of saying that when Stein, Shankly and Busby would have grown up, certainly in the 1910s and the 20s and the 30s, all football crowds with records are broken in Scotland. In Glasgow, they were always the biggest crowds, 140,000 mark, and those kind of regular crowds. So Glasgow was kind of seen as a bit like Brazil was in the 50s and 60s, right. Maracana. They'd have the biggest crowds there. But what he described it as brilliantly to me was a bit like, the sort of the Viennese coffee houses, fermented revolution in the 1840s. Football was fermented like that in Glasgow. They talked about it. They were obsessed by it. Like, Sir Matt Busby grew up in the same street as Alex James, who was the most famous footballer in Britain, if not the world. He'd say it would be like growing up in the same streets as Lionel Messi or Ronaldo. Yeah. It inflected everything you did. So because they were so obsessed by it, the Scots, it became like all they spoke about on the weekends. It became almost like a religion in Scotland. And therefore, what spun out of that was these incredible men. And I believe the last of them was probably the way we think of the Scots then, Sir Alex Ferguson, somebody that just seemed to know the game inside out.
Right, and it's enhanced by the fact, it's emphasised by the fact that when you get down to the players, which we'll do ultimately, is this classic idea that you could throw a bedsheet over the amount of space of Glasgow that it took to build the 11 effectively. I think there's one outlier, isn't there? I think in there somewhere.
There's this thing where they talk about it where some one or two of them are born within 10 miles. Bobby Lennox is born 30 miles away in Saltcoats. Tommy Gemmell is born 11 miles away in Motherwell. How dare they? Yeah. The rest of them, the Scots and Celtic fans obviously, but in football, you can reel off the team: Simpson, Craig, Gemmell, Murdoch, McNeil, Clark, Johnston, Wallace, Chalmers, Old and Lennox. Those boys were all... Sir Alex Ferguson said a wonderful quote when he was asked who's the greatest football manager ever lived was, and he said, there's no doubt about it. He said, it's Jock Stein.
Right.
John Stein at that period, because he won the European Cup with the Glasgow District 11. And I know you always loved that quote.
I do.
Because it's like you're only picking boys from your local area, yes, and you're beating the best in Europe.
And this is also backed up by, and certainly in this perfect season you're describing, there's 5 cups.
Yes.
The obsession in Glasgow is incredible. The Glasgow Cup is one of the ones they win.
Yeah.
Which just struck me as being arguably the stupidest idea in the world. And yet it translates. So Rangers have won it 44 times.
Yes.
Celtic 29 times. It started in 1887. And it finished in 89 in its kind of current form, or in its original form.
Yeah.
Only 5 finals didn't feature either Celtic or Rangers.
Yeah. And this was one of them in '67. I think they beat Partick, didn't they?
Probably, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So they beat another team entirely.
Yeah.
But early doors, the Third Lanarks were a very successful team. So the other ones, like Clyde, Partick and Queen's Park, are all part of it.
Yeah.
So what they did then, the Old Firm youth teams take part. So there still seems to be great value to it. And it's still kind of, it always had some merit, because Glasgow, as a city, was that obsessed about football. You even go back as far as the Glasgow FA. They played Sheffield FA for the very first time in 1874. So you've got basically the 2 original starting points of football. I mean, Sheffield is given that role, isn't it? That's kind of like base camp in England, Glasgow base camp there. So they met as far back as 1874. But I'm a big fan of the Third Lanarks, Rifle Volunteers football team, effectively.
Played in red because of red coats?
Exactly. Yeah. But are also known as the High Highs because apparently, and of course this is how all the best names come about, at one point, a defender lumps the ball over the, rose ends it, to protect presumably some kind of lead or whatever. At which point the crowd start chanting high, 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 high. So they become known as the High Highs. And I think to this very day, if you go down Crown Street in the Gorbals, there's the High High bar.
Oh, really? That's
them. So and also credit to it, there's an AFC Third Lanarks now as well.
Yes.
So someone is trying to keep the tradition alive. There's an amateur team and youth teams. So again, Glasgow and its roots in football just remain strong.
Oh, it's a wonderful city, Mark, to go to. It's a wonderful city to go and watch football in. And I've been very lucky that I've seen international football there. I've managed to see all the teams there, Rangers, Celtic. I've seen them all. I've seen Partick Thistle, Queen's Park many, many times because I grew up, Merthyr had an exchange thing with Queen's Park in the late 80s with their two fanzines. Dial for Merthyr, the one in Merthyr, played the Spider's Web, which was the Queen's Park one. So we learned all about Queen's Park's glorious history. I mean, they were the strongest team in Scotland, famously played in the English FA Cup, nearly won it.
Yes.
So, they were, we could do a podcast
didn't move
on
to
them.
Shepherd's Bush.
No, they didn't. Bush. I mean, the Bush from Shepherd's Bush.
Del Boy didn't acquire Queen's Park and called them Rangers.
provided
right.
the vast majority of the team that played the first ever international match against England.
Yep.
That's the oldest international. So England and Scotland got this incredible, and it's very close, Mark, in games won. And even to this day, England find it very difficult to beat Scotland. As they still draw with them. Whereas Wales, certainly in the last few years, we've been a little bit competitive, but we're a long way behind them in games won, certainly. Scotland, a bit like Wales in rugby, has been a fierce rivalry for well over a century. Have kind of fought them tooth and nail every step of the way. And even now in competitions, Scotland famously drew with them just recently. The Scots will raise their game certainly for the English.
I imagine. And the great thing about this, the sort of like the litmus test of this 67 would be if anyone, and I'm not totally convinced that we'll finish this story in this episode.
No, we're not. I think it's such a great story
because it's obviously it's two sides to the same coin.
It's basically, we want to talk to our audience about this. Me and Mark use this expression which we'd love you to sort of like understand us. It's skinny jeans, flared jeans. Yeah. So there's a theory in the 20th century that fashion, certainly in the Western world, is either going to be skinny jeans for a while or flared jeans. And there's a lot of truth in it. So like early 70s, you get flared jeans, but the late 70s, the jeans become tighter with new wave. And this is kind of like the pattern throughout sort of social history in Britain and America.
With the matching haircuts.
That's
with
absolutely.
Serious to the point, short haircuts, straight jeans.
Yes.
Long, flamboyant, and stylish with the flair. So you've got the look.
Well, if you think of it now, we're in a skinny jean period, aren't we?
Well,
times are tougher. Lads have very tight on the back haircuts and on top. It's sort of a very sort of austere look. So I will equate that in football terms. There's two styles of football. We talk about this a lot, and I talk about it in depth to someone like Sean Dyche, who knows the game inside out. Sean, and he says it's totally right. You've got two styles of football, right? And this whole podcast will sort of envelop these brilliantly. You've got skinny jeans, right, which is defensive football, right?
Yes.
Which is, we'll talk about Inter Milan and Heleno Herrera, the way he played the Catenaccio. And it's defensive football built out from a strong defence, not conceding goals and hitting you on the counter-attack.
Yeah.
There we go, right? That's skinny jeans. Then you got flared jeans, possession-based football. We're playing it around, tick-a-taka, triangles, Liverpool called it. Celtic did it brilliantly. A lot of elasticity, moving the ball forward. Scottish football from its start. Low, short balls and keeping the ball. Flared football.
Yeah, Jimmy Johnson's not an accident in that state. So, welcome to the Lionels.
Yes.
Which is what we're going to be dealing with.
So Celtic are definitely the Lionels.
They're the Lionels.
Yeah.
Now,
that's for out there. That's Lionel Blair, who was a famous British entertainer, and his Cockney rhyme slang for flares.
I lapsed into the
We
vernacular.
have a lot of youngsters listening to this.
No.
But this is where they learn. This is where we'll teach them.
Watch and learn. Come and join. There's some other ones which are a little less edifying. But let's stick with Lionels in that particular case. Then. I think what's crucial as well, and you've touched on it already at the top there, 67. If anyone is going to think that it's a soft European Cup win, think again. Can
I stop you there?
Yes.
There is no such thing as a soft European Cup win.
That's also probably true.
Which is slightly... annoys me. And I'll let you carry on, Mark, but I had it a bit with Forest when they won the 2 European Cups. And I'd always counter by saying, did you know Real Madrid were in that competition?
That's what I mean.
And Barcelona were in the next one.
Yeah.
And Juventus were in those competitions. So if it was easy, my great question is, why didn't they win it?
Why didn't they do it instead? And of course, and that's the point, because of course the team they actually end up beating had basically won it twice in the previous 3 years anyway.
Best team of that
exactly.
decade.
So we genuinely, in England and then around Europe, would look up to Scotland with genuine envy at that stage, because we are looking at the best of the bunch at that time. They have absolutely nailed football at that stage. But of course, it all begins with this remarkable journey of Jock Stein's, doesn't it? Which probably to his advantage is somewhat circuitous. He didn't just end up being always at Celtic, did he?
No, it's an amazing journey. And I'm going to ask this as the question which we'll ask in the start.
Good.
Who did John Stein, commonly known as Jock, grow up supporting as a young boy?
Interesting.
There's a question for you. Born in an area called Lanarkshire of Scotland, a mining area, on the 5th of October 1922. An astonishing career. I feel as if I have a personal affinity to John Stein. In so many ways, I call him John quite a lot. To Jock, I was there the night that he died.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I was there. I was in Indian Park. I was a young boy watching Wales, Scotland. I was there with my grandfather and my father. Now, remember, my grandfather and father both worked underground, so they had a huge affinity to Jock. I remember the silence leaving Mark, because even in those days, people had transistor radios. So I was aware very quickly as a young boy that something grave had happened.
Right.
And the word, as we were coming out of the old Indian Park, walking towards our car, was that Stein had died. And I can remember the silence going home and on the radio, my father and my grandfather being very subdued because he'd passed.
He was a local lad, by then, wasn't he?
Well, he had strong. Obviously, he was a minor,
Right.
And obviously, I talk about this quite a lot. My father used to do this amazing thing all my life where he was a minor when people came on television who'd been minors, like Bobby Robson. You'd always go Bobby Robson. Minor. So he had this great sort of pride in the fact that these minors had done, especially in politics, where you had a lot of people then who'd started in that world. Nye Bevan was his great one. I mean, the man invented the NHS. So he would always have this thing of doing that. Stein was one of these people that he would talk about, but Jock Stein basically was never a professional footballer until he came to Wales. And what happened was Llanelli, just after the Second World War, ironically, had a bit of money and a flamboyant owner, and I've just been talking about, brought some Scotsmen down.
Of course he did.
To try and get promoted. And Jock Stein played in Llanelli, and he was there, and he was thinking. So of the three, Stein, Shankly and Busby worked in the pits for a few years and found their way out of pretty quickly because they were scouted as good footballers.
Right.
Stein was very different, and I think this gave him a certain kind of inner steel that made him slightly different to the other two. That he was years underground, and he was playing part-time football for Albion Rovers. So he was never a full-time footballer in his life. So this offer from Llanelli came, and of course, he was like, I got a chance to play football.
Yes.
So he goes to Llanelli. His house back home in Hamilton, I think it was, his council house, it gets burgled. And this upsets him and his wife greatly. She goes back to Glasgow and she's very homesick at this point. And he decides, I'm going to take a chance. And he decides, I'm going to go back home. And he actually said at this point, I'm going back to mining full time. So at this point, Jock Stein
basically
was lost to football.
The fork in the road, decided no more.
And bizarrely, Celtic have an injury crisis at centre-half. And he almost can't believe this himself. And Celtic come in for him. He actually famously says, are you sure they want me?
This is a mad coincidence, isn't it?
Coincidence.
Because obviously it's literally this moment
yes,
in which everything could have changed in Scottish football.
Everything could have changed. He could have been lost to the game. Arguably the greatest ever manager in a lot of respects, certainly domestically, probably internationally as well. He got into 2 World Cups. He could have been lost to the game, but he decides, okay, I'll take it. And the injury crisis means that he actually goes into the reserve team at first.
Right.
So he goes into the Celtic reserve team. And he starts there. And at that moment, I think it's sort of the early 50s, he goes to Celtic and everything is about to change in Celtic's history because this is a very conservative club with a small C. It's only had, I think, 2 or 3 managers at this point. It's like they had a manager for like 25 years.
Right.
It's a deeply Catholic club, deeply Catholic, by the way. Strong Irish roots, grown out of of Brother Walid, who comes over from Ireland and sets up this thing in a very impoverished East End.
They literally wear their heart on their sleeve,
Absolutely.
Don't they? Yeah.
This is probably, the most Irish club in the world.
even Ireland.
Even Ireland, yeah. So it's a thing. So Jock Stein goes to Celtic, and I think that's a perfect place, Mark, to end this half.
Yes.
Because when he goes to Celtic, we're going to explain how Celtic changed completely. Hello and welcome back to the second half of If You Know Your History. And I just left you hanging there because Jock Stein, a man born in Hamilton, Lanarkshire, a minor, ex-minor, has arrived in Celtic.
Yes. And things might happen as a result of that, but not necessarily straight away. But there is something that you've got to do straight away.
Yes.
I hope this is a cat amongst the pigeons.
Mm-hmm.
Who did Mr. John, quote, Jock Stein, support as a club? You mentioned you asked the question in part 1.
I did.
Answer it now for us, please.
He grew up a Glasgow Rangers
fan. Did he really?
He did. He grew up as a Protestant. His father was a dyed-in-the-wool Rangers fan. Like old Scotland, a very split community.
Yeah.
You were Catholic or Protestant. Sectarianism is deep roots in Scotland. Sort of emigrated. One of the sad things about emigrated across from Ireland really was this huge division and hatred between Catholics and Protestants. And John very much grew up on the side of the blue Rangers side.
Which is why, in its own way, it's a beautiful thing that he managed to be a bit of a hands across the sea, didn't he?
Well, he did because he married a Catholic.
Yes.
His wife was Catholic.
And, of course, he then unites them as an international manager, and so good would out.
He used a wonderful line where he described sectarianism as stupid thinking.
It's
a wonderful line.
Love that you don't need to say anymore, do you?
Thinking. So he's a man that kind of like embodies the way that you can cross this divide and sort of try to ride it. But there were times when it was a very, very difficult thing for him.
Right.
When he was attacked personally and all these kind of things, which we'll talk about later in his Celtic career. But he goes there. He's a centre half. And he gets into the first team very quickly, and he's seen as a very steady, strong centre-half. He was always very self-depreciating in interviews, Jock. He says things like, I was okay, I could head the ball, I could tackle. But I'm like, well, hang on a second now, Jock. You go to play for Celtic, You win the title and the cup in 54 by going in.
Yeah.
You quickly become the captain.
Yeah.
So you're like, there's somebody sort of, something you've seen about you. 1954, you win in Scottish, and they haven't, don't forget, this is a Celtic team that hasn't won anything for like 10, 20, 30 years. So him going in there is a little bit of a catalyst. And there's a wonderful moment where he takes over as a captain, and his vice captain is Sean Fallon, who famously becomes his right-hand man throughout the great Celtic career.
Okay.
So him and Sean
Which
become
makes so
inseparable.
much sense, doesn't it? Because you've got this kind of symbiotic relationship already building, haven't you?
Absolutely right. But by 57, he kind of he retires. He's had a terrible problem with his ankle. He's gone over on it, and Celtic take him on because they can see he's a very astute man.
Yeah.
I mean, Alex Ferguson says, Sir Alex Ferguson, he tells these wonderful stories of like spending time as a young man with Jock Stein. And he said he never drank in his whole life, Jock.
Right.
But he just drank copious amounts of tea. Nothing wrong with that. And he said he'd keep this tea pot going all night, and he'd send off his sort of, the kit man. And he said, and he said he'd just keep talking and talking, football. And he said, we'd be like 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. And he said, John, I need to go to bed, or I need to go back to Manchester next one. He go, you'll be all right, son. Have another cup of tea with me. He didn't sleep, apparently. He had terrible problems sleeping. Yeah, so he was and he was constantly. Archie McPherson talks about a terrible worrier. He wasn't physically in good shape after he left football. He kind of like, a huge appetite, all his mining men talk about. So he put a lot of weight on.
Yeah.
And he had health issues, which is what, ultimately killed him, basically, in the game. So he was a man that kind of like, he fascinated me, who kind of, the way I would describe, he lived on his nerves.
Well, do you know, and the way that you've set him up now to get him to this stage in his life is why you see him. He's one of the 3 kings, but he's separate from the other 2.
He's younger.
Because the other
slightly younger.
And also
He stays in Scotland.
Yeah, he stays in Scotland, and the other 2 are kind of vivacious individuals who you can see being effective as players as well as managers.
Yeah.
Whereas there's something so stoical about everything that Jock Stein ever did that you always think the brain's going to be sort of like the driving force in the film.
Yes, yeah. Well, like you're saying, you're right. He was an instant captain.
Exactly.
There's something to be said about players, play from the back, who see the pitch. There's theories about it, of course. So he's got a little bit of that going on. The players there, Bertie Peacock, who's a player who plays with him, famously says, I mean, I've never known a man so obsessed with the game in my life. Very much that they used to talk about the way Clough and Taylor were together, just talked about the game all the time. So there's a kind of like, it goes back to this thing we were talking about, the early part of Scotland, where the game just dominated life in a way that it's hard to almost understand now, where they just spoke.
Yeah, in an unusual, perhaps not so surprising way, he's not that unusual.
No.
I mean, perhaps the only unusual
product
thing
of his
is
environment, really.
Yeah, but he hasn't got a pint of heavy in front of him. He's got a cup of Rosie.
Yeah,
exactly. Yes, right. Oh, sorry, Rosie. Rosie Lee.
More Cockney white rhyming.
Sorry.
So he's in the reserves, and the story goes, the great Archie McPherson, who wrote his autobiography, who I was lucky enough to meet and interview for 3 Kings, who was a wonderful storyteller and full of great information about Jock, very close friends, flew all over the world together. So the perfect man to tell you, what Jock was saying to him. And he was kind of told by Celtic that he'll never manage the club because don't forget, he turns the reserves on. This is the big thing about Stein that I want to talk about. I talk about this, Mark, quite a lot, where managers go into clubs and have an instant effect.
Right.
We're going to talk a little bit in another episode about Graham Taylor, for argument's sake. Yes. He does an amazing job at Watford. And he takes Lincoln up famously, and that's the start of it. And he's on people's radar. But it takes him 3 years to get Lincoln going, for argument's sake. 3 years. And I was a bit like, okay, Busby goes into Manchester United and starts turning them around pretty quickly. It wins an FA Cup in 48, I think, and he sort of gets them going. But he's 2 or 3 years, but it's okay. Shankly has quite an instant. None of them are like Stein, Mark. I mean, Stein is I've never known a manager have such an instant effect wherever he goes in this part of his career. It's astonishing.
And it strikes me that, he kind of mapped it in the literal sense, saying, I've got a master plan, and this is how I'm going to arrive at being the manager of a European Cup on his side. But it's the route of management strikes me as being so useful for him. Yeah. Because he doesn't leapfrog straight into being numero uno, does
it? It's a great point, because he has to earn it. Yeah. So he's told at Celtic he'll never be the first team manager, because even though he's got this amazing reserve team, which has got McNeil in there, Murdoch, he's got players in there already that will become Lisbon Lions. So he knows there's something in Celtic brewing. He feels that. Obviously, a brain like probably like few other people ever in the history of the game. But he's told no. So he goes to Dunfermline. So here's a great example, right? He goes to Dunfermline, who are threatened with relegation. And wins 6 matches on the trot, Mark, when he goes in there. I mean, how do you even do that?
No.
So they go like, okay, something's happening here. And what somebody described it once is like a tornado hitting the town as Jock arrives. he wins a Scottish Cup with them, with Dunfermline.
They haven't got previous that suggests they were just on the cusp.
It's astonishing. He's still seen to this day as their greatest ever manager by quite a distance, because he wins a Scottish Cup with them. He beats Celtic in the final, famously. So it's like, this is all kicking off.
So the clues are there.
He gets the quarter-final of the European Cup in his cup in 1962. The same year, he's higher enough up in the league at this point to qualify for what they used to call then the Fairs Cup. We now would call it the Europa League. In that Europa League, Mark, this guy is arriving now. He beats Everton and Valencia with Dunfermline. Right. So this is this kind of guy.
So talking about, now Jock Stein's setting his stall out, and surely people are noticing.
And they are. He's getting offers from Newcastle. He's getting big clubs coming in and going, well, what's going on with this guy here? He's obviously, and we just talked about it. There's this thing about Scottish managers anyway. Yeah. So, of course, they're looking north and going, my goodness, look at this fella. He's gone to Dunfermline.
And Newcastle is going to be tempting for anyone of a certain part of Scotland, because it's not that much of a move.
Lots of Scotsmen move there.
Suddenly you're not going to, if you're going to go London on the south coast, that's a big story. Yeah. But Newcastle might feel like a logical place as a step.
In those days, definitely. I mean, people like John O'Hare went to Sunderland and all those famous things. Territory. So you've got that thing. Hugh Gallagher, I think, goes to Newcastle. So there's lots of Scotsmen would have gone there. It's very close culturally as well, you'd say, the North East, isn't it? Yeah. So anyway, he goes there, and then he gets an offer from Hibs to go there in 1964. They're struggling again. Turns them round immediately. Wins the Summer Cup. I know you loved that.
Summer Cup.
You're like, I love this Scottish thing. Glasgow Cup, Summer Cup.
Yeah, there's literally not enough football being played in Scotland. So basically, when the season's closed down, we'll have another go. And that one is the Summer Cup. Just quickly on that one there, because you mentioned the Scottish Football League 11, which I think is one that Billy McNeil turned out for. I'd love to have been there, and I was probably young enough to have gone. In 1910, the Scottish Football League 11 turned up and came down here to play the newly formed Southern League, because up until that stage, of course, it was still the northern powerhouses were dominant. Yes. The Southern League comes down, and the Scottish League play them, and they play at Millwall. Mm-hmm. And they beat them, Southern League beats them, and then they beat the Football League team as well. So come World War II, the Football League have gone like, I'll tell you what, and so they combined after the Great War. But again, Scottish Football League, much in the way that we talked about the fact that Glasgow FA, way back was sending teams out. Now you had Scottish representative 11s as well, which of course meant it wasn't always necessarily Scotsmen. No. So kind of interesting and entertaining in its own right, you'd have thought, wouldn't you? Yeah. I mean, I think there's a feeling at that time in football where you could cobble together teams. So you obviously this in international football where like England play France, Wales, Italy, and a European 11. Right, yeah, exactly.
You just go like things that wouldn't. We've seen the last of it. I think. Do you remember there was a game at Wembley on the centenary of the Football League where a rest of the world team with like Diego Maradona played an English league team? Do you remember that?
Yes.
So that you don't really have them anymore. Yes.
The Olympics is probably the one time you kind of that you can drop. You can drop all of your defences. Yes. And allow yourself to embrace the moment. Can't
well, there was an Olympic team, wasn't there, in the London Olympics, which was Welsh, which was fought hugely by some of the FAs and the fans, because the great fear in football, and I'll tell you this as a Welshman, is because football is such a powerful sport and the foreign football associations are so powerful in UEFA. The idea that we've got these four countries
now all of a sudden they want you should be always GB is
and I believe
hanging over us, isn't it?
We've still got four very powerful votes because we were the original FAs, the four original FAs. We have a lot of power, and a lot of them just don't like it. Don't think it's fair, which is understandable. But so the FA in, for argument's sake, Wales and all that will cling on to this and go. It's important we keep our national. We were just talking about it. Wales, England. You know what I mean?
Right, and if I may lapse once again, I'm sorry, Europe, but tough earth for kit. It's all I'll say to that.
Yeah, well, we've got history on our side. You know, we just talked about the first international.
Yeah, you really can't undermine that much history, can you?
You can't. No. So these things are really important to the game, to life. Yeah. So that's why we've got that on our side.
Obviously, you'll take us forward now to glory, but can I just mention, because of course they met. He first met. You mentioned Billy McNeil. Who I think he first encountered when Billy McNeil came to the reserves when Jock Stein was managing them. And he's from Moss End, just down the road. What a life that man led. Yeah. Lived down in Hereford for a while because his dad was posted there for the army. Right. But he's also he stood for Parliament several times.
Did he?
On a very Scottish ticket. Good for him. Yeah. Wrote his own biographies, got himself an honorary degree. But does he out Billy Wright in the fact that Billy Wright marries a Beverley sister.
He does, yeah.
Billy McNeil marries a dancer from the White Heather Club.
Ooh.
Scottish TV's finest moment, apparently. 1958 to 1968, Andy Stewart would finish the show every day. Naturally, bit tartan is the criticism it gets now. Bit hokey.
Right.
H.G. Back is was the name of it. They used to tour theatres with it. It was enormous. Stanley Baxter, the comedian, started on there with doing sketches. But they released an album in 1965 as well of their songs by a duo called Hall and McGregor. And you think, okay, well, aren't we a long way from football? No, they're the blokes who gave us 1960s Football Crazy. Oh. Possibly the first football song on record.
Yeah, and everybody knows it.
Don't they?
We're football crazy.
We're football mad.
Yeah.
Don't know the rest of the lyrics,
but there's something there that had.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Trips off the tongue. So Billy McNeil, I love. This man is obviously he's led a life. Very different man from Jock Stein, it would seem.
Yeah, he is.
But clearly the perfect counterpoint.
He's his captain, and you know it sells you everything. They've both got statues outside, Celtic Park.
There you go.
He's the greatest captain the club has ever had, and the greatest manager the club has ever had, and probably ever will have.
Yeah.
If we're honest, it's a bit like who's going to top what he did, because he's gone to Celtic, and it's very clever the way he gets there. He has a real offer from Wolves while he's at Hibs. There's a little bit of talk about Hibs. He gets Hibs going.
I was going to say, because Hibs is still a powerhouse city, obviously.
Well,
big club, obviously.
Bigger than Celtic in the 50s in the sense of what
there
they
you
won.
go. So
the famous five.
They might seem like the bigger catch.
Yeah. So he goes there. But I think he's always a Celtic man since he played there. That's the thing.
That's a good point.
And he says this wonderful thing. It's really poignant when he goes, I like the fans. I like the people. They ask him, why do you stay at Celtic when you had these huge money offers to go south of the borders?
Exactly.
Just because I like the people, I like the fans, which is really interesting as a Protestant man.
Well, of course, and he's done the same thing in Hibernian as well.
Yeah. Well, it was one great regret of his career was leaving Birmingham. He said, I was really embarrassed because I knew I was getting them going. And I think he knew in his heart that he was going to go to Celtic, and he sold the goalkeeper, I think Ronnie Simpson, across to Celtic before he went. Although later it was found that he was going to go anyway. But also he had Pat Stanton there, who could become a great footballer for Hibs. So he knew he had a team. Yeah, I mean, a wonderful player. And he'd got them to again, they challenged him for a title. They did 2 semi-finals of the Cup. Again, instant Jock Stein, bang, it's like it's happening. And his win rate, Mark, to this day is the highest of any manager Hibs have ever had. Probably one of the highest rate, 62%.
And that comes as part of the style of play that he, which again, when we look at the other side of the coin of that European Cup final, as you say, we're wearing flared jeans in this episode.
Oh, he's playing football.
This is the nature of the guy.
Real Madrid, Mark. So he arranges a friendly with Real Madrid at Hibs. There's like 32,000 there. They beat them 2-0. It's filmed. It's an amazing bit of footage.
Wow.
So they win that. Wolves come in for him. This is what's really interesting. Wolves, Stan Cullis is gone, I believe. Yeah. They go, here's the man, Jock Stein. They literally go to him. They said to him, just name your figure. We want you. He goes to the Celtic chairman at this point, the one who had apparently told him, you'll never be the manager, and went, look, very clever. After a bit of advice, Wolves are in for me. Obviously, Bob Kelly has seen what he's done at Dunfermline and Wolves. Dunfermline and Hibs, and he's gone, I think I might need this fella. But here's the kicker, right? This makes me laugh. He says to him, well, why didn't you come back to Celtic as assistant manager to Sean Fallon? Jock goes, no, why would I do that?
Yeah.
I'm just flying with Hibs. Okay, comes back apparently, maybe the next day or two, goes, got it. You'd be joint managers with Sean Fallon because they're so nervous about appointing a Protestant manager. Don't forget, this is only
they're still trying to hide him to a certain extent. Absolutely.
So this is only the 4th managerial appointment in Celtic's history, Mark. And it's 1960.
Oh, okay. So 1/4 of the Celtic managers
exactly.
of the opposite religious persuasion.
So basically, he's told, and then finally Kelly gives in and goes, all right, you can have the manager's job. And Sean will be your assistant, and that's fine with you.
Wow.
And this is the kicker, you'll get to pick the team.
Which, of course, sounds normal, doesn't it?
Which is exactly what Busby did at Manchester United.
Yeah.
He let me pick the team, and Shankly did at Liverpool.
Right.
Because Busby was going to go to Liverpool. Remember, we spoke about this.
Yes.
But they went, you can't pick the team. We still have a committee that picks the team. And he went, isn't it amazing how much in football, like a committee of people would still pick the team and give to the manager?
I mean, the level of stupidity at this point in our lives seems, obvious, but it would have been at the same time.
Yeah.
Because, of course, how can a manager instill his philosophy on people that he doesn't think he can work with.
Exactly.
Necessarily. It
But
makes no sense.
But Mark, it still happens. I mean, people.
That's totally true.
They go. Oh, I can't believe that happened. There's so many clubs, there's so many clubs like Watford who had like a transfer committee, and the coach just comes in.
These fellas.
This happens all the time.
Yeah.
So there's nothing new in that.
No.
But these blokes were actually going, no, I want to pick the players and I pick the team.
Yeah.
And I have a say on the transfers. So they were like almost like a new generation of manager in that sense. Very dynamic and forward thinking. So he gets all this stuff that's agreed to. Goes to Celtic. So Jock Stein is finally at Celtic. It's 1965. Off he goes. And the Celtic have not won anything for a long time. He knows he's got these players there. He's obviously arrived at this glorious reputation. There's a bit of consternation amongst the board that they brought in a Protestant.
Right.
And there was Mark right through the rest of his career. Even at the very end of his career, he always felt that...
Oh, it was still there.
He won 9 titles in a trot, right? 9. The 10th he didn't, they were grumbles. And there was a wonderful quote by Jonny.
Waiting to fail.
Absolutely. And Jonny Giles said this amazing thing. He said, football is unique and not like any other industry on the planet. And the reason for that is you can be successful for 5 years on a trot, but on the 6th year, you have to be more successful.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, if you're not, it's a failure.
No, you've not been given any room to...
Nothing. In fact, the way he describes it, the more successful you are, the less room you're given to have any kind of...
It's self-fulfilling prophecy, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
But do you remember those 3 kind of years in the mid-noughties when Ferguson kind of had a bit of a rough time?
Right.
When Chelsea had come along with Mourinho, he was winning titles. Wenger seemed to be ahead of him. People were going, is he kind of gone? He'd flirted with retirement, said he was going to retire, and then changed his mind. Do you remember all that? And everybody was kind of going, he's an older Scottish... It was the first signs of it. He's an older Scottish fella.
Yeah,
he's gone.
Yeah, exactly. That's
right. What are the diets?
He's
like
a story from another, a previous era, blah, blah,
and
blah.
amazingly, a great argument for being the greatest manager ever, turned it round.
Yeah.
And so we've seen what Manchester United are like now without him there,
yes.
which tells you everything. But, Stein had a bit of this later on in his career. So there was always going to be people at that football club in positions of power that didn't like the fact there was a Protestant manager. That's a fact.
That this strong will that you talked about him having, it must have remained ironclad forever. Because you say they're looking over his shoulder when he it didn't go quite so well a few years down the line, which guarantees means they're looking over his shoulder every day.
Yes,
looking to find something that isn't right.
Absolutely, and there are mostly Catholic players in the team. There are some Protestants that play for Celtic, much more than play for Rangers, by the way. The idea of a Catholic being a manager or a player there is like verboten at that point.
Right.
That didn't change till Graham goes in there.
Of course, yeah.
So Celtic are a little bit more progressive in that sense that they do have Protestants who are involved in the team. But it's still a deeply, and I say this as a son of a Welsh Catholic, who was long lapsed. Who, when I grew up, said to me, I was a Celtic fan because when you were a kid and you were Catholic, you supported Celtic.
Right.
It's pretty much what you did.
Right.
So that's the world that Stein lives in. But he's a Protestant miner from Hamilton,
yes.
a really Protestant area. I now manage, arguably outside the church, the biggest Catholic institution
by the way,
in Scotland.
Insomniac teetotaler.
Yes.
Let's chuck that into the mix as well. You know.
Exactly. So he goes to Celtic, right? Okay. Is he going to have the same instant reaction? Because he's done it at Dunfermline, he's done it at Hibs, he's even done it in the reserves. Different now, Mark.
You don't know, because you're now under a completely different microscope, aren't you?
Couldn't agree more. Yeah. And has this Celtic team, a bit like the team that he joined in the early 50s, haven't won anything since then.
Right.
So there's been a barren period of about a decade. And I cannot stress this enough. Rangers absolutely dominate at this point.
Yeah.
They dominate Scottish football. They win everything. They're the biggest club at this point. Everything is going for them. And remember this, the new manager of Celtic, Jock Stein, is a Rangers fan as a kid, and now he's managing Celtic.
Yeah.
And in he goes. Now, like you said, talk about ironclad. There's a lot of pressure there.
Yeah.
It's no wonder the bloke couldn't sleep. It's like,
it all makes sense.
It all makes sense. I mean, the pressure there is astonishing. And don't forget, when he grew up, courting his later wife Jean. Winshin, they call it in Scotland. Winshin, which means courting up there.
Oh, does it?
It's a really nice expression. When he was winshin Jean, Archie McPherson tells me, he was dodging about like the CIA were after
It does sound like he's lowering her onto a ship.
Like a miner going to a pit.
That's exactly.
Just winching him up, Jean. And so he's a man that's very aware of the deep sectarian divide in Scotland. And for a modern generation, when people listening to this, I have to tell you, and I've studied history, certainly, at that time it was divided, but 50, 60 years before, and 100 years before, riots, Mark, where people were killed and really dangerous.
I mean, the Troubles are arriving in across the water very shortly.
A tiny fraction that it didn't happen in Glasgow like it did in Belfast later.
Right.
It's on a tinderbox like that.
Yes.
It's amazing that it didn't really, but it didn't. It managed to stay, as much in a sporting sense as possible. But those games, like, you see footage of crowds, like there was a little trouble at games in the 40s, 50s, well, way back, they was, and it wasn't hooliganism like we've seen later.
No.
This was sectarianism played out on the terraces. Ferguson tells an amazing story of sneaking into a game when he was a kid, and his mother and father find out him and his brother were there because they're in the front of the paper the next day in the crowd.
Back to rights.
And they're caught. So this is the kind of world that he gets. Anyway, he arrives at Celtic. First year, he wins the Scottish Cup, famously. And they'd broken this drought. And he afterwards goes in and he says this wonderful thing. He says, I went into the dressing room and I looked at these players and I knew in that season, he convinced them, you're going to be okay. They won the title. I'd broken a barrier.
Wow.
I looked at them and I thought, and do you know what's really interesting, Mark? Brian Clough, all the Miracle Men say to me, when they won the Anglo whatever cup. Do you remember that cup in the 70s?
Oh, yeah, that's Anglo-Scottish, wasn't it?
I think it was the Anglo-Scottish, they called it, but sometimes they played a team from Italy or something like that, or maybe that was the Texaco
Yeah,
Cup.
there was perhaps 6 or 8 teams involved.
Yeah.
It's some weird thing.
And they won it, and Clough almost famously said they had a thirst. I looked at them and I thought they want to win more cups.
Well, that goes back to right at the very top. I'm quoting him, we could win everything, which felt like a bold statement. And it felt, you might argue, too much of a challenge for that squad of local lads in front of him to go, everything's all right if that includes the Glasgow Cup and the League Cup and the top. But taking that into Europe is another ask, isn't it?
Absolutely. So in 1966, Mark, the following season after the Scottish Cup, they win the title.
For
the first time since 1954, they win the title. And I can't stress this enough again, against a very strong Rangers team. Aberdeen are strong, Hearts, Dunfermline are good. This is not the league that we kind of think of now.
No, it's not a 1.5 horse race like it might be now.
They tend to win it more than the others, of course. Mostly Rangers at this point, but there are some fine. Motherwell are a fine team, probably. That's where they get Ian St John from.
Right.
So Ron Yates is playing up there football at this time. Shankly goes up there and gets them. So this league is full of brilliant football players. Jim Baxter's up there. This is I can't stress this enough.
Yes.
Scotland is strong.
Yeah, and because what's not happening is they're not leaving in basically in droves to go and play the English game.
Well, this is an important fact, Mark. I'm very glad you raised that, because when that starts happening, certainly by the early, there was always Scottish footballers that went south, and managers, of course. But where it tips is in the early 70s. And what happens there is the first time you see Dalglish leave Celtic, Lou Macari leaves Celtic to Manchester United, Dalglish famously goes to Liverpool. It becomes quite sizable, the gap in going to English football.
Yeah.
By this time in the mid-60s, it wasn't big enough that you didn't want to stay in Glasgow.
No.
Like you said, like Billy McNeil, you could meet a local girl who was a bit of a star on the television.
Exactly.
So the pay discrepancies were nothing like they would become, and certainly are now, as we know. But at that point, you could probably keep your best players.
Yeah.
Glasgow's a thriving city. There's a lot of work in the city. This is the mid-60s.
You're not in a backwater.
No, you're not. Certainly.
This is a rich town,
absolutely,
with a vibrant lifestyle and beautiful suburbs to live in. Yeah. And as you say, you're worshipped.
Huge crowds. A really strong international team, as we spoke about. 1967, they go and beat England, often winning the home nations sort of championship, which was the big international thing in Britain at that point. As big as, certainly bigger than European championships, not as big as the World Cup by then, but that took to the mid-50s to change. It was the home nations championship was everything in British football. So that dynamic was changing later. But at this point, the mid-60s, full employment, Britain's starting to swing. There's loads of industry, loads of work. The shipyards are thriving. There's coal fields. There's not a lot of reason to leave Scotland unless, you really want to, experience a different culture.
Right.
You can keep your players. So this is all building up beautifully. He's won the title. He's won the Scottish Cup the year before. He's won the title. So he's broken that stranglehold of Rangers. He's got the players coming in. He's got these wonderful players that he knows, a lot of them from the reserves. He's playing in a really strong team. The national team is strong. They go qualify for Europe. And remember this now, no British team has won the European Cup at this point. No Northern Hemisphere, Northern European team has won it. I mean, the closest probably would have been, we've spoken about it a few times, was the Munich A disaster stopped the great Manchester United team of 1958, possibly winning the title, winning the European Cup. But after that, fine Spurs teams and Wolves teams, Mark, they hadn't got there. And it was a bit of a shock to the system. The other thing was European football was massively on an upward trajectory as well. What was happening there was they were playing football a very specific way, and you had wonderful coaches there. A certain man arrived in the early part of the 60s called Helenio Herrera, HH.
Yes.
Who at this point, Mark, is seen as the best coach manager in the world.
Spain and Italy have got a running things at that stage.
Absolutely right.
On mainland Europe. He's straight-leg jeans.
Yes.
He's the next episode. But is it assumed that straight legs are going to outdo flare?
Yes.
Straight leg jeans are going to outdo.
At this point,
jeans.
straight leg jeans are the height of fashion. They look great.
Yeah.
Everybody aspires to it.
So does that. You got that lovely. You can see your ears. Got nice parting.
Nice parting. Here comes Jock and his Scottish lads. They're all in not just flared jeans. They're frayed at the bottom.
Of course they are.
They got Desi boots on.
They've probably even got embroidered flowers on the
thistle,
back pocket.
Exactly. On the back pocket. A little embroidered thistle on the back pocket. So here's Jock Stein come in. Here's Herrera. I'm going to end this episode, and the next episode will be all about that journey when they meet in the European Cup. But I'm going to set it up by saying this, which is lovely, because I know you'll want to join us. What Jock does fascinates me. He's such a disciple of the game that in the mid-60s, he goes, while at Dunfermline, to watch a Herrero team and study them.
He's almost like he's doing his homework.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I'm sure it's because he's football obsessed.
Yes.
And he wants to see how greatness is operating elsewhere.
And on top of that, so don't forget, this Stein there's some fascinating things I found out about Stein. I was like, wow. He goes to Wembley at 53 to watch England-Hungary. He's there.
Right.
Studying it. One of the treats they have at Celtic, I think it might be for the win the double, they go to the World Cup in 54 in Switzerland. Stein, they say, spends most of his time jotting down in a little notepad as many games as he wants. The rest of the Celtic team are going, should we just invite a few beers and go to the Alps? Jock's going, no, I'm watching the game. This is Stein all over, right? But then I'll finish this episode by saying this, and sets it up beautifully. Tight jeans, flared jeans. In 1965, in December, he's taken over at Celtic. And during that time, he flies over to Milan to watch Grand Milan, they were nicknamed that.
Right.
To Milan, best team in Europe. And their best player, Fascetti, right? He persuades him to come back to his hotel bar with him for I suppose Jock would have had a coffee.
Exactly. That's right, yeah.
What would the other lad?
Well, it would have been it'll be a tap water. Would be
tap
nice.
Water, yeah.
No ice.
What would the other lad have had? A Moretti, perhaps,
I
or
like
whatever.
to think
Yeah. So where he made him draw on a napkin the way Inter Milan play.
No.
So that's how we're going to set this up.
So the prep is there. Wow.
Celtic have qualified this European Cup, as it was called then. The two-time winners are in the competition as well, led by the greatest manager considered in the world at this point, an Argentinian called Helenio Herrera. But Jock Stein has now arrived with the swinging blue jeans. Oh, I can't say blue, swinging green jeans.
Nice.
Tie-dyed. Yes, tie-dyed jeans from Glasgow.
They are. I mean, and superb though they are, what they're not. They're no third Lennox. Up the eyes.
Before we leave, Mark, on that high note,
thank you very much.
To say people can subscribe, follow, leave messages. This is fantastic. I've now noticed on my Facebook, Mark, we're up to 70,000 people have viewed it and looked at what we're doing.
Decent.
More the merrier for that, please. We will share it on social media. Mark's on X.
I am indeed.
I'm on Insta as Johnny Owen 71. That's not my age. It's the year I was born. And I'm also on Facebook as well as Jonathan Owen. So please follow us on social media as well.
It's Mark Webster, and I'm nearly 71.